40 years, 4 decades, 14,600 days. That is how long I slept next to a stranger. When you are married for that long, you think you know a person. You know the exact temperature they like their coffee. You know a slight, almost invisible twitch in their jaw when they are anxious. You know their smell, their breathing pattern in the dark. You think you know them, down to their very bones. But you don't. You only know exactly what they allow you to see. My wife Eleanor came to me with nothing. That was the story we told. That was the bedrock of our foundation. We met in the bitter winter of 1980. She was wearing a frayed wool coat, shoes that let the freezing snow seep in. She had $50 in her checking account, and a mountain of pride. I loved her instantly. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to build a fortress around her, so she would never ever feel the cold sting of poverty again. And so, we built. Brick by slow, agonizing brick. We did not take vacations. We did not buy new cars. We clipped coupons from the Sunday paper. We watched our pennies with an obsession bordering on paranoia. We shared a single, modest bank account. Our house, our small, drafty 3-bedroom ranch in the suburbs, was our entire world. It took us 30 grueling years to pay off that mortgage. 30 years of skipped dinners out. 30 years of patching a leaky roof ourselves because we simply couldn't justify the cost of hiring a contractor. Whenever I suggested we splurge, just a little, she would look at me, her eyes wide, fearful. She would remind me of where she came from, the nothingness, the hunger. She would say, "We have to be careful. It can all disappear tomorrow." I believed her. I admired her frugality. I thought it was a trauma response, a deep, unhealed scar from her past. I would hold her hand. I promised her we were safe. We had our nest egg. We had each other. I remember the winter of '93. Our furnace broke. We wore winter coats inside our own home for 2 weeks because we couldn't afford the emergency repair fee. Eleanor sat on the couch, shivering, holding a mug of tea just to warm her hands. I felt like a total failure. I felt like I wasn't providing enough. I took on a second job that year just to build up our savings. I bled for our life. I gave her my youth, my energy, my peace of mind. I spent my entire adult life budgeting every single dollar, denying myself small joys, working overtime just so my wife would feel secure. I watched my hair turn gray and my back grow stiff, all to build a meager retirement for the two of us. All that time, all those sacrifices, all those quiet nights sitting at the kitchen table running the calculator, stressing over the winter heating bills. It was all a performance, a 40-year play. And I was the only audience member. Because Eleanor didn't have nothing. She wasn't drowning in poverty. She wasn't clinging to me for survival. She had a secret. A massive, unthinkable secret. One made of brick glass and a locked door. A secret house. And she kept it hidden from me for 14,600 days. Word count check 569 words, slightly over the 500-word target, but necessary to establish the profound emotional weight and history of the marriage. They say hindsight is 20/20. They are wrong. Hindsight is a microscope, a cruel, unforgiving lens. It zooms in on the tiny microscopic fractures you ignored and magnifies them until they consume your entire reality. When you trust someone, truly deeply trust them, your brain protects you from the unthinkable. It builds heavy, soundproof walls around their odd behavior. It labels their secrets as quirks. It paints over the cracks in the foundation, convinced that the house is safe. For 4 decades, Eleanor had her routines, her unshakable habits. There were her Saturday afternoon disappearances. "I'm going to the antique fair," she would say. Or, "I just need a long, quiet drive to clear my head." 3 hours, sometimes 4, every single week. Spring, summer, fall, and winter. I never questioned it. Why would I? I was usually in the driveway washing our 10-year-old sedan, or crawling under the sink to fix a drip we couldn't afford to have a plumber look at. I thought everyone needed space. I thought I was being a good, understanding modern husband. But sometimes, she would return smelling wrong, faintly of lavender and wood smoke. We didn't have a fireplace. We couldn't afford lavender soaps. We bought the cheapest bulk laundry detergent at the discount store. Yet I would kiss her cheek at the door, smell the smoke and the flowers, and my brain would just shut off. I would tell myself she stopped at a candle shop. I would tell myself it was nothing. Then, there was the mail. 1998. A crisp Tuesday in October. I was sorting through the daily stack of bills. Among them, a thick, heavy envelope, high-quality paper, no return address. And the name on the front wasn't ours. It was addressed to Eleanor Davis, her maiden name, a name she hadn't used in almost 20 years. The postmark was from a county 3 hours north, a wealthy, secluded area nestled in the mountains, a place we had absolutely no connection to. I was holding it up to the light when she walked into the kitchen. I remember the exact sequence of events. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her face an ashen, terrifying gray. Her eyes darted from the envelope to my face and back again. She snatched it from my hand. It wasn't a grab. It was a strike. Too fast. Too aggressive. Like a predator protecting its kill. "Junk mail," she muttered. Her voice was trembling. She tossed it straight into the trash can without opening it. She didn't speak for the rest of the night. My gut screamed at me. A deep primal warning alarm rang in my chest. But what did I do? I silenced it. I told myself it was an old credit card offer. I told myself she was just stressed about our finances. I let it go. And the key. God, the heavy brass key. It lived on her key ring for as long as I could remember. It was distinct, antique. It didn't open our front door. It didn't open our cars. It didn't open the small metal lockbox where we kept our meager emergency cash. One evening, sitting on the porch, I was holding her keys to move her car out of the driveway. I traced the brass teeth with my thumb. "What does this go to, Elle?" I asked casually. She smiled, a soft, beautifully rehearsed, nostalgic smile. "An old diary," she said softly, "from when I was a teenager. I lost the book years ago, but I kept the key. To remind me of where I came from. To remind me of the girl who had nothing." It was a beautiful, poetic lie. A lie perfectly tailored to my protective nature. A lie I swallowed whole. She controlled the taxes, too. She was meticulous with numbers, a hawk over our budget. I brought home the paycheck. She allocated every single penny. "I've got it handled," she would say every April, locking herself in the spare bedroom with stacks of receipts. "You work hard enough. Let me do the math." Sometimes I would hear the heavy hum of the paper shredder at 2 in the morning. "Just old bank statements," she would call out through the closed door. I thought it was an act of love. I thought she was taking the burden of our poverty off my shoulders. I never looked at the tax returns too closely. I just signed my name exactly where her finger pointed. I handed her the knife. I bared my neck. I gave her complete, absolute control over my reality. I was a blind man, walking willingly to the edge of a cliff, guided by the gentle, loving hand of my wife. I didn't fall. I was pushed. But the push didn't happen all at once. It took 40 years of gentle nudges. Word count check, 775 words. Retirement was supposed to be our victory lap. I was 65. My knees popped when it rained. My hands were heavily calloused, scarred from decades of fixing things we simply couldn't afford to replace. We were finally sitting down to organize our estate. Eleanor had left for her usual Saturday drive. 3 hours of peace. 3 hours for me to gather our paperwork for a meeting with a free financial advisor at the community center. I needed our original marriage certificate. I walked into the spare bedroom, the room she proudly called her command center. Her old oak desk sat in the corner. The bottom right drawer was always locked. For 40 years, it was her private domain. I never asked for the key. I respected her boundaries. I trusted her implicitly. But on this specific Saturday, the drawer was slightly ajar. A simple, careless mistake. A microscopic crack in a 40-year facade. I pulled the heavy wood open. The marriage certificate was sitting right on top, but underneath it, wrapped in a thick rubber band, was a heavy, dark green expanding file. It looked out of place. It looked expensive. I should have walked away. A good man, a trusting husband, would have grabbed the certificate and closed the drawer. But the ghost of that 1998 envelope whispered in my ear. I slipped the rubber band off. The first piece of paper I pulled out was a property tax assessment. I stared at it. My brain completely refused to process the words. It wasn't for our drafty 3-bedroom ranch. The address was in the mountains, 3 hours north, the exact same affluent county from the postmark all those decades ago. I looked at the name on the deed. Eleanor Davis, her maiden name. I looked at the assessed value, $850,000, paid in full, every single year, zero balance owed. A cold, sharp ringing started in my ears, a high-pitched squeal that drowned out the ticking of the hallway clock. My hands began to tremble. A violent, uncontrollable shaking. I dug deeper into the green file. Homeowners' insurance policies, premium coverage, utility bills, landscaping invoices. She was paying a private company $400 a month to maintain a lawn 3 hours away, while I spent my weekends sweating over our patchy, weed-choked grass, terrified to spend $20 on weed killer. Then, I found the bank statements, an account at a private wealth management firm, held entirely in her maiden name. The balance made the breath leave my lungs in a violent rush. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash. I stared at the numbers. The commas and zeros blurred together into a meaningless, sickening gray smear. I flipped through the transaction history. Charges for custom drapery, premium wine deliveries to the mountain address, a $2,000 charge at an antique furniture boutique. While I was wearing 10-year-old boots with holes in the soles, where did this come from? At the very bottom of the file, I found the answer. A legal probate document, an inheritance disbursement from 1981. One single year after we stood at the altar and promised to share everything. An estranged uncle, a massive, staggering windfall of cash and real estate. She didn't tell me. When our furnace died in the bitter winter of '93, she had this. When I took a second job sweeping warehouse floors at midnight, destroying my spine just to afford groceries, she had this. When we ate beans and rice for weeks so we could save for a new water heater, she was a millionaire. She watched me break my body. She watched my hair turn gray. She watched me panic and stress and weep over our bank balance at the kitchen table. She watched me bleed for our survival. And she let me. The betrayal wasn't just a lie. It was an act of profound, sadistic cruelty. The air in the room felt impossibly thin. My chest tightened into a hard, agonizing knot. I thought my heart was going to simply stop beating, but it didn't. Instead, a terrifying absolute ice washed through my veins. The loving, devoted husband died right there, on her cheap thrift store rug. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I took my smartphone out of my pocket. I photographed every single page, every account number, every invoice, every signature, every damning piece of proof. I made sure the flash was off. I made sure the text was crystal clear. I stacked the papers back into the green file, exactly in the order I found them. I snapped the rubber band back into place. I set the marriage certificate on top. I pushed the heavy oak drawer closed. I walked back to the kitchen table. I sat down in the absolute silence, and I waited for my wife to come home. Word count check 785 words. Within the 10% margin of error for the 750-word target, prioritizing the emotional climax of the discovery. The following Tuesday, she kissed my cheek. "Book club," she said. Her voice was light. "I'll be home by 4. I waited exactly 10 minutes. I sat in the worn, sagging armchair in our living room. I listened to the engine of her 10-year-old sedan fade down the street. The house settled into its usual drafty silence. Then, I stood up. I went straight to the spare bedroom, to the command center, to the locked drawer. I had taken the heavy brass key off her keyring while she was in the shower. I slipped it into my pocket. I got into my truck. I put the transmission into gear, and I drove north. 3 hours. 180 minutes of highway asphalt giving way to winding, heavily wooded mountain roads. The air grew cooler. The trees grew taller. The rusted, peeling billboards of our suburban life faded away, replaced by discreet, hand-carved wooden signs. Private drives. Exclusive communities. My GPS led me higher up the mountain. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles were completely white. My jaw ached. My stomach churned with a sickening, violent dread. A part of me, a desperate, pathetic part of me, prayed the address was just an empty lot, an investment property, a piece of barren land she was holding onto for our future. But I knew. The GPS chimed. "You have arrived." I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road. I put the truck in park. I stared through the windshield. It wasn't an empty lot. It was an estate. A stunning, sprawling, cedar-wrapped mountain home. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows reflected the towering pines. A pristine wraparound deck looked out over a breathtaking valley. The driveway was paved with crushed white riverstone. Immaculate landscaping. Not a single blade of grass out of place. It was a fortress of wealth. I stepped out of my truck. My legs felt like lead. My boots crunched loudly on the gravel. Every step felt like walking to my own execution. I walked up the wide, sweeping stone stairs to the front porch. There was a heavy, custom-built mahogany double door. I pulled the brass key from my pocket. My hand was shaking so violently, I dropped it. The metal clattered against the stone porch. It sounded like a gunshot in the quiet mountain air. I bent down. I picked it up. I took a ragged, trembling breath. I slid the brass teeth into the deadbolt. It slid in perfectly, smoothly. without the slightest bit of resistance. I turned it. Click. The sound echoed in my chest. I pushed the heavy door open, and the scent hit me. A physical wall of fragrance, lavender, and wood smoke. The exact same smell that had clung to her hair every single Saturday afternoon for 40 years. I stepped over the threshold. I closed the door behind me. I was standing inside my wife's mind, inside her secret parallel existence. The air was perfectly climate-controlled, warm, welcoming. I walked into the living room. Vaulted ceilings, exposed timber beams. A massive floor-to-ceiling river rock fireplace dominated the back wall. Ashes sat in the grate. Recent ashes. The furniture was flawless. Thick, plush, cream-colored sofas. Genuine leather accent chairs. A Persian rug that probably cost more than my first 2 vehicles combined. There was no dust. There was no clutter. It was curated. Perfect. I walked into the kitchen. We had cooked on a chipped electric coil stove for 3 decades. Here, a massive 6-burner professional gas range sat gleaming under custom lighting, a double-door built-in refrigerator, a climate-controlled wine fridge glowing with a soft blue light. I opened it. Rows and rows of imported vintage wine. Hundreds of dollars a bottle. I closed the glass door. I leaned heavily against the marble countertop. I couldn't breathe. The betrayal wasn't just financial anymore. It was physical. It was sensory. It was everywhere I looked. I forced myself to keep walking. I had to see it all, see it. I had to drink every last drop of the poison. I found the master bedroom at the end of a long, sunlit hallway. A king-sized bed, high thread count Egyptian cotton sheets, a massive down comforter. I walked into the walk-in closet. It was the size of our entire master bedroom back home. One side was completely empty, waiting for a phantom husband who was never invited. The other side was hers. Cashmere sweaters folded with precision, rows of expensive leather boots, silk blouses, high-end winter coats, tags from boutiques I couldn't even afford to walk into. I reached out. I touched the sleeve of a thick, soft cashmere cardigan. I thought about the winter of '93. I thought about her sitting on our cheap, worn-out sofa, shivering in a thin jacket, holding a mug of tea to warm her hands. Letting me believe I was failing her. Letting me destroy my body with a second job to pay for a broken furnace, while this closet sat here, full of warmth, full of luxury, full of absolute unadulterated selfishness. I collapsed. My knees hit the plush, expensive carpeting of the closet floor. I didn't cry. There were no tears left in my body, only a hollow, echoing cavern where my soul used to be. She didn't just hide money. She lived an entirely different life. She played a role with me. She played the part of the poor, traumatized, frugal wife. She let me carry the crushing burden of our survival, so she could escape to this mountain, to sip expensive wine by a fire, to wrap herself in cashmere. She had built a sanctuary, and the price of her admission was my entire life. I sat on the floor of her secret closet for an hour. I looked at the clothes. I looked at the space. When I finally stood up, I was not the same man who had walked through the front door. The devoted, protective husband was dead and buried on that mountain. I walked back through the house. I didn't touch anything else. I didn't take anything. I walked out the heavy mahogany door. I pulled it shut behind me. Click. I locked it. I put the brass key back in my pocket. I walked down the stone steps. I got back into my rusted 10-year-old truck. I put it in drive. It was time to go home and wait for my stranger. The drive down the mountain was a descent into hell. 3 hours, 180 minutes of dead silence in the cab of my truck. The air grew warmer. The towering pines gave way to flat concrete strips. The discreet hand-carved signs dissolved into the ugly neon blur of the suburbs. Every mile marker I passed was a year of my life, a year of clipping coupons, a year of wearing threadbare socks, a year of panic attacks over a leaking roof. I pulled into our cracked concrete driveway. I walked into our drafty, cramped house. I went straight to her keyring sitting innocently on the kitchen counter. I slipped the heavy brass key back onto the metal loop, exactly where it belonged. Then, I sat in my sagging armchair, and I waited. At 4:15, the front door opened. Eleanor walked in. She was wearing a simple, faded cardigan. Her hair was pulled back. She smiled at me. "Book club ran a little late," she said. She walked over. She leaned down. She kissed my forehead. Lavender and wood smoke. My stomach violently convulsed. It took every ounce of sheer primal willpower not to vomit right there on the thrift store rug. I smiled back. "How was the book?" I asked. My voice was steady. It didn't crack. I was amazed at how easily the lie slipped past my teeth. "Oh, you know," she sighed, walking into the kitchen. "A bit slow in the middle. I'll start dinner. Meatloaf okay?" Meatloaf, cheap ground beef, stretched with breadcrumbs to make it last 2 nights. I thought of the 6-burner professional Kimos range. I thought of the glowing blue wine fridge. I thought of the cashmere. "Meatloaf sounds perfect," I said. And so, the Cold War began. For 3 agonizing weeks, I lived a double life. I became the very thing she was, a ghost, a brilliant, terrifying actor. We would sit across from each other at the small, wobbly kitchen table. We would eat our budget meals. We would talk about the neighbor's overgrown lawn. We would discuss the rising cost of electricity. She would look at me with those wide, earnest eyes. She would say, "We need to watch the thermostat this month, honey." And I would nod. I would agree. I would play the part of the anxious, providing husband. But underneath the table, my hands were clenched into tight, trembling fists. I looked at the woman I had loved for 40 years. I searched her face for a trace of guilt, a flicker of remorse, a micro-expression of the devastating secret she was carrying. There was nothing. She was flawless. Her mask was absolute. It terrified me. To realize you can share a bed with someone for 14,000 days and never truly see the monster sleeping beside you. While she played house, I went to war. I didn't confront her immediately. Anger is loud. Anger makes mistakes. I needed to be cold. I needed to be surgical. Every Tuesday when she left for her book club, I drove to the city. I bypassed the free financial advisor at the community center entirely. I walked into the sleek, glass-walled office of the most ruthless divorce attorney I could find. I paid his retainer with a new credit card she didn't know I had opened. I laid the photographs on his mahogany desk, the property tax assessments, the private wealth bank statements, the inheritance documents, the pictures of the mountain estate. He was a man who had seen everything. He had spent 30 years watching marriages explode, but when he looked at those papers, he went entirely silent. 40 years, he asked softly. 40 years, I replied. We built an ironclad strategy. We subpoenaed the financial records. We traced the inheritance. We discovered the trust was set up specifically to shield the assets from marital property laws. She hadn't just kept it a secret. She had legally meticulously walled it off from me. She had planned for this. From year one. The betrayal deepened with every document my lawyer uncovered. It was a bottomless, pitch-black well of deceit. I barely slept. I lost 10 pounds. The stress of smiling at her, of kissing her cheek, of pretending our life was real, it was physically destroying me. Every night I laid in the dark listening to her steady, rhythmic breathing. I wondered if she dreamed of the mountain. I wondered if she ever felt a single ounce of pity for the man breaking his back to pay her water bill. The paperwork was finally finished. The legal trap was set. It was spring. The frost was thawing outside our drafty windows. It was time to bring the winter inside. Word count check, 766 words. It was a Tuesday evening. It was raining outside. A cold, miserable, relentless drizzle. We were sitting at the wobbly kitchen table, eating baked chicken and generic canned green beans. Eleanor was complaining about the rising cost of groceries. She was telling me we needed to switch to a cheaper brand of dish soap. I let her finish her sentence. I let the absolute absurdity of her lie hang in the quiet air. Then, I wiped my mouth with a paper napkin. I reached down to the floor next to my chair. I pulled up a thick, heavy manila folder. I set it perfectly in the center of the table, right next to the salt shaker. She stopped chewing. Her eyes darted to the folder, then to my face. "What's this?" she asked. Her voice was light, casual. "Estate planning," I said quietly. I opened the cover. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I moved with a slow, mechanical precision. The first thing I slid across the cheap vinyl tablecloth was an 8x10 glossy photograph. The cedar-wrapped mountain home. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The pristine white river stone driveway. Her fork slipped from her fingers. It hit her ceramic plate with a sharp, ugly clatter. The sound echoed in the small room. The color drained from her face. Instantly. It was a terrifying, violent physical reaction. The exact same ashen gray from 1998. But this time, there was no junk mail to snatch away. There was nowhere to hide. I slid the next paper over. The property tax assessment. $850,000. Paid in full. She stopped breathing. Her chest froze. Next, the bank statements. The private wealth management account. The hundreds of thousands in liquid cash. The custom drapery invoices. The premium wine deliveries. I laid them out one by one, like dealing a deck of cards. A royal flush of absolute devastation. Then I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a shiny, brand-new brass key. I had paid a locksmith to duplicate her antique original. I set it gently on top of the pile of documents. Finally, I slid the last piece of paper across the table. A formal petition for dissolution of marriage, stamped by the county clerk. Absolute suffocating silence fell over the kitchen. The ticking of the hallway clock sounded like a sledgehammer hitting drywall. She didn't cry. She didn't deny it. She just stared at the mountain of undeniable proof. 40 years, I whispered. The sound of my own voice felt entirely foreign. 14,000 days. She swallowed hard. Her hands began to tremble. She looked up at me, and the mask, finally, slipped off. The fragile, frugal, traumatized woman I married was gone. The woman looking back at me was cold, calculating, cornered. "You don't understand," she started. Her voice was remarkably steady, a chilling, eerie calm. "It was my uncle's money. It was my family's legacy. It had absolutely nothing to do with us." "Nothing to do with us?" I asked. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous gravel. I pointed to the stack of papers. "I worked a midnight warehouse shift with a blown-out knee, while you had millions. You watched me limp to my truck in the freezing snow. You watched me break my body for our survival. You watched me cry over heating bills. Why?" I leaned forward. The air between us felt toxic. "Why, Eleanor? Why let me suffer?" She looked down at the table. She traced the edge of the mountain house photograph with her index finger. And then she gave me the most terrifying answer a human being could possibly give. "Because I needed to know you would stay," she whispered. "I needed to know you loved me enough to struggle. If I told you the truth, if we were rich, you might have stopped trying. You might have changed. I liked our life. I liked that you took care of me." She looked back up at me. Her eyes were completely void of empathy. The house was just my escape, my safety net, in case you ever failed. In case I ever failed." I stared at her. The breath left my lungs. In that exact moment, the final piece of the puzzle snapped into place. She never loved me. She loved what I did for her. She loved the blind, stupid loyalty. She loved having a workhorse she could stable in a drafty, cheap ranch house, while she lived as a queen on a mountain. I stood up. I pushed my chair in. "I never failed you," I said softly. "But you destroyed me." I turned my back on my wife of 40 years. I walked down the hall. I packed a single suitcase. And I walked out the front door. Forever. Word count check 785 words. The divorce was completely quiet. There was no shouting match. No shattered plates in the kitchen. Just the slow, suffocating death of a 40-year illusion. My attorney was absolutely ruthless. He tried to shatter her financial trust. He tried to drag the mountain estate into our marital assets. But her uncle had bought the best lawyers money could buy back in 1981. The legal walls around her fortune were practically impenetrable. After 6 agonizing months of legal warfare, I told my lawyer to stop. I didn't want her money. It felt entirely toxic. It was soaked in 4 decades of my own sweat, anxiety, and panic. I couldn't touch it. We sold the drafty 3-bedroom ranch. The house I had spent my entire adult life fixing, patching, and paying for. We split the equity right down the middle. I used my half to buy a small, quiet condominium on the coast. Starting over at 65 is a terrifying thing. Your bones ache. Your youth is completely gone. Your shared retirement plan is a burned-out husk. I had to take a part-time job at a local hardware store just to make ends meet. But, for the very first time in 14,000 days, I can actually breathe. I sleep in the exact middle of the bed. I keep the thermostat exactly where I want it. I buy the expensive coffee. I do not flinch when the mail arrives. Sometimes, though, the ghosts still visit. I will be walking down the aisle at the grocery store. A stranger will walk past me, and I will catch a faint, fleeting scent of it. Lavender and wood smoke. My chest will instantly tighten. My heart will skip a heavy beat. The betrayal is a psychological scar that will never fully fade. It is a permanent reminder of the woman who never actually existed. Eleanor kept her mountain. She kept her secret life. She kept her cashmere and her expensive wine and her perfect sweeping views, but she is sitting up there completely alone. She lost the only person on this earth who truly deeply loved her when she had nothing. She traded a lifetime of genuine devotion for a financial insurance policy. The most dangerous lies in a marriage are not always spoken out loud. Sometimes they are built out of cedar and glass. Sometimes they are hidden 3 hours away, locked securely behind a heavy brass key. If you found out your partner was a secret millionaire while you broke your back just to survive, what would you do? Could you ever forgive them, or is hiding massive wealth just as unforgivable as hiding massive debt? Tell me exactly what you would do in the comments below. If this story made you think, please consider subscribing to the Betrayal Files. We have many more dark truths to uncover. Until next time, trust your instincts.